So welcome everyone to the EU-India People Summit. Now we are having a panel on the global rise of the far right, and the panel will be moderated by my co-organizer Kheya. Here, I will hand it over to you, Kheya, to introduce the panel and the speakers. Thank you.
So hello everyone, welcome to this session of the EU-India People Summit, which is taking place under the shadow of COVID. I'm Kheya, a France-based academic and activist, and member of what I loosely call the Progressive Indian Diaspora. And I'm also an advisory board member of the Foundation London Story, which is one of the main organizers of this event. So today we are going to speak on the rise of the far right. The so-called far right is in power in a few different countries today, and we see all around us the catastrophic consequences of some of these regimes. But today, what I want to talk about, what I want to bring out specifically, is how the far right rises to power, how the far right goes from being a sort of marginal, often group of street thugs in quotes to really accessing seats of power. So today I have with me here 4 eminent panelists coming from very different parts of the world and bringing very different perspectives. So I would, the way we will organize this is that I will introduce all the panelists one by one, and then I will call upon each of you to speak for a while, and then we will shift to discussion mode and also take questions from the audience. So the audience can, I think, write questions in the chat. And then we will finish with calling on the panelists to make their closing remarks. So let me begin by introducing Vidya Dinker. She's an activist feminist from the south of India, and she has been at the forefront of fighting the violent far right in that part of the world. She is a social justice warrior with special interest in gender justice and food rights. She is part of the Kavane Mahapat and the president of the Indian Social Action Forum in SAF. She also happens to be a dear friend. Vidya is joined by Dr. Eviane Leidig, who is a research fellow at the International Center for Counterterrorism in The Hague, and an affiliate at the Center for Research on Extremism at the University of Oslo. Her research specializes on the far right, gender, and online radicalization, and etc., both in India and the West. She actively bridges theory and practice, for example, by serving as policy advisor on the far right, on far right extremism. We also have Professor Justin Podur, whose short biography on his webpage simply reads, Justin Podur is a Toronto-based writer. So in fact, he is a very well-known name in the global anti-imperialist circles. He is an activist and a prolific writer of both fiction and non-fiction. He is an associate professor at York University's Faculty of Environment and Urban Change. He has reported and written widely on issues of political and social justice from many different parts of the world, from India, so Kashmir and Chhattisgarh, from Afghanistan, Pakistan, Haiti, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Colombia, Venezuela, Mexico, and Israel, Palestine, the last being, his writings on the last being how I actually know of him. The 4th panelist today with us is Professor Apoorvanand, who teaches Hindi at University of Delhi. He's also a prolific bilingual writer of both fiction and non-fiction, and his speeches, especially rendered beautifully in Hindi, are legendary in the university circles. He has authored several books and numerous scholarly as well as popular articles in both Hindi and English. He's also a socio-political activist for progressive causes in the Indian and global context. So recently, he has become a household name beyond the progressive academic and activist circles in India, thanks to for a sad reason, thanks to the persecution by the current government. So, so welcome all of you, and thank you for taking time out for being with us today. I think I will start then by calling on Vidya. Vidya, if you could please tell us about your global perspective on the rise of the far right, as well as, recount stories from the microcosm of North Karnataka, where you had like a front seat view of the rise almost from scratch of the Hindutva brigade. So, Vidya.
Thank you, Kheya. Thank you for inviting me. I'm not so sure that I can give you a whole worldwide view. So I'll give it to you from my Kupamonduk state, which is the frog in the well, here in coastal Karnataka that I live. Coastal Karnataka has often been called the laboratory of Hindutva in the south. And most people think that it's since after the Babri Masjid and demolition and 2000 onwards that the far right has really risen and gained power here. My understanding differs a little, both from anecdotal evidence from conversations that I've had around me, and also digging out old newspapers and little bits of information. But let me talk of what most activists in this region, that is now considered a region where there is like an unusual number of hate crimes or communal incidents. So coastal Karnataka was a couple of years ago was the place where the most hate crimes had happened. Let me cut to 2005 March, which is when people think the first Gauraksha kind of raid happened, and it really sent shockwaves across the state because it was 60-year-old Hajaba and his son Husainaba, who were stripped of their clothes, beaten and paraded naked for 3 hours by members of the Hindu Yuva Sena, the Bajrang Dal and the BHP. This is in the present-day neighboring district of Udupi, but coastal Karnataka, this small place, which is Dakshina Kannada and Udupi, was together South Canara, one district until a few years ago. So, of course, they justified the violence, as most people are doing even till today, that the father-son duo were actually illegally transporting cattle. And most people hark back to this one incident and call it the beginning of cow vigilantism in coastal Karnataka. This is only partially true, because in 1952, the same district of Udupi had the first political mobilization for Gaurakshaks. So they had this huge kind of so all the recipes for this laboratory have actually been tried out time and again, and we've seen it not just from the 1980s on, but even earlier. The Sangh Parivar has been quite powerful here. I think it's 1968 that Udupi became the first municipality in which the Jan Sangh took power. And this there was this huge what they called a cow week in 52, where there was the National Cow Weekly was organized by the RSS and Udupi under the leadership of Swamijis of the Mutt, and the Vishwatirtha Swamiji of Pejawar Mutt has been a big BHP leader. And cow slaughter was unequivocally opposed. Leaders stressed the need for a regular cow parliament to discuss methods to combat this. And the assembled leaders felt that the Indian National Congress had done nothing in the interest of cows. And a collective call for banning the slaughter of cows were raised. Signatures were collected. A letter went out to the president. And this is 1952. Just 3 years ago, we saw Hussein Abba, a 62-year-old man with his son and two nephews who were waylaid by Bajrang Dal members and the police at Hiryatka, again in Udupi. And he told his son and nephews to run away. He thought he knew the people who were intercepting him. They had in his sumo, they had cattle that he had just picked up from a house who had called him to pick up the cattle. So he was a cattle trader. Hussein Abba thought he could talk. It was somebody from the place he had picked up the cattle. He thought the police could be handled, but he was actually done to death. The family got a call a couple of hours later saying that pick up the body. We found the body. Finally, it was proven that the police were together with the Bajrang Dal in this, and for the first time, the police officials were also charged. And we are still following up this case. And the police internal inquiry is going on even now. Last month, there was another inquiry. So what we see is a pattern of informers and supporters within the establishment playing out almost every time. And this is not just for Gauraksha, but love jihad. And love jihad has been sort of, it has played out as moral policing that we call immoral policing in our area for a very long time. About 2 decades where boys and girls cannot even go and have an ice cream together if they belong to different religions. They cannot even talk in a bus, like if I'm a Muslim boy and a Hindu girl who is my classmate is sitting in the bus and I hand her my bag to just hold, and that's all. Then I can be hauled out of the bus, I can be beaten up black and blue, and sometimes the girl can also be slapped. Very recently, there was this young Muslim boy and Hindu girl traveling for an interview to Bangalore, and they were beaten up by Bajrang Dal activists. This is just last month. The boy broke his nose, he was bleeding, he was passing out, but the girl was so bold as to actually file a complaint. But then has had so many VHP leaders and people coming and threatening her that she's now gone all quiet. So this we see played out time and again, and it's something which is very curious, because every young person now, if he happens to be Hindu, will feel very comfortable saying "Bolo Gau Mata ki Jai" or "Bolo Bharat Mata ki Jai," because while the BJP might have been and is still controlled in its leadership by the upper caste, it is the fishermen community, the Bilava community, which is the traditional toddy tapper community, my community, which is the most populace of this place, that now feel quite attracted and quite invigorated to be part of the Hindu Yuva Sena or the Hindu Jagran Vedike or the Bajrang Dal or the Ram Sena. And why is this? Traditionally, a lot of these boys used to feel there was something if they were part of these groups that were part of the underworld. It was a world that they loved. A lot of underworld chiefs in Bombay and Mangalore were from this region. Most of them are now going into these kinds of outfits, and there's a new sort of credibility that they enjoy through this. In fact, I have seen that in the courts, when they have to, if there is a complaint and they're actually in the courts, everyone will come and congratulate them and be friendly with them, etc. So it's quite odd. And now there's a further elevation. So it's not just about Gauraksha and the Raksha of women. Both of them are encapsulated as one, but it's also nationalism. So there is like a new, a pride that they feel, a masculinity and a nationalistic pride, which makes every young man sort of gravitate towards being part of these outfits. And definitely the law, etc., is not catching up. In our region, we also see competitive communal politics being played out. So we have the Karnataka Forum for Dignity, which is now metamorphosed into the PFI, which is the People's Front of India. And they play the same games that the Sangh plays, the Bajrang Dal plays. So you have this competitive politics. So every time, for example, if there is a lynching of a Muslim, then the PFI will want to go take over the corpse, take it in a procession, become very, very, there will be a lot of public posturing about it. And so there is this competition, and there is even retaliatory killings now. So if a Hindu is killed, then immediately a Muslim will be killed. And we have seen more recently the wonderful example of Bashir, an innocent man who was killed, but his family appealed for peace, saying, yes, we know that our father was an innocent man killed in a retaliatory killing after a Hindu boy was killed, but please, he was a man who loved peace, and please do not, please honor his life by please stepping back and stepping away from the violence. So yes, so it is Bashir's family that is still distraught that 2.5 years after his killing, the trial has not even begun. Why? Because the forensics have not been submitted yet by the police to the court. And we keep pushing at the authorities, but it's a long fight to create some kind of confidence in communities. We try to do this even on behalf of people who have been victims on the side of the right. There are Bajrang Dal people who are killed. There are members of the BJP who are killed. And we try to reach out to them too. It's not as easy as reaching out to Muslim victims of lynching and communal violence, but it's a process that we are staying with. Okay. Yes, for now, Kheya, I think I've run out of time, but if you tell me I can talk more, I can. Others, I come back later.
Yeah, maybe we can take up some of these issues during the discussion. So thanks a lot, Vidya, for this, very enlightening and really sad, I have to say, making us aware of all this sad reality. So next, I would like to call on Eviane. You bring a unique academic view of the far right, the parallel between European far right and well, you say the Western one, but the Western far right, but I have Europe in mind, and the Indian one. So you have a PhD thesis on this topic, and you have written extensively on it. And I have to say that I'm a fan of that work. So please do elaborate on that and comment also on the link. So a lot of people are aware of the link between the European far right, meaning that really the Nazism of Germany and fascism of Italy, and the RSS, the history of RSS, but not many people know about the more recent links of how these two movements have fed off each other, and how some Western alt-right thinkers like Elst have been nurtured in India. So it would be really nice if you can tell us more about that. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. And thank you very much for the invitation to speak. And it's an honor to be with the others on this panel today. And I guess before I start, I also just want to offer my sympathies to those in India right now under the current COVID situation, and especially to those in Delhi. So my heart goes out to those. Right, so in today's talk, or not talk, but I guess discussion really, I'm used to saying talk since I'm used to giving academic talks. I really want to emphasize this primary point that India's far right, Hindutva, has always been globally oriented. I write for an audience of European and North American academics who don't really know anything about India. So this is something I always try to emphasize in my work. So I just want to just give a couple of thoughts about maybe some of the historical ties. As you mentioned, some of us here do know about that, but I just want to sort of make that clear and then talk about some of the contemporary connections. So in terms of even just the development of Hindutva as an ideology, we know that these scholars were influenced by European scholars of nationalism during colonialism. So how European scholars were writing about race and ethnicity, language and territory, and that became an inspiration for developing Hindutva as an ideology. And in particular, the writings of British and German Orientalists, those who had set up institutions of learning within South Asia, and how these Orientalist scholars would depict, in particular, Islam and Muslims. And this was a quite interesting shift because early Hindutva scholars, they were often depicting Christians as that perceived enemy, as foreign, as other. And it was because these Hindutva scholars were reading Orientalist writings that they started to perceive Muslims and Islam as another threat to the Rashtra. And then, of course, within the organizations themselves, they've also been extremely globally oriented. I guess it goes without saying, for those who don't know, the founders of the RSS traveled to fascist Italy, met with Mussolini, and were really inspired by the paramilitary drills, the sort of exercises of the young men within fascist Italy, the black shirts. And that became the modus operandi for the RSS. And that continues to this day, right? And the notion of authoritarianism, which is so strongly reinforced in this very masculine display. And then those relations continue during the Second World War with Nazi Germany as well, both through sort of official and unofficial means. So this took place through letter correspondences, newspaper editorials, and Nazi Germany became really a true inspiration for the RSS. It became much more extreme and hardline, its racialization, and you know, the Third Reich's treatment of the Jewish quote-unquote problem was something to be seen to be modeled with India's treatment of the Muslim population. And then we also had figures who engaged in a myriad of activities like Savitri Devi, who some of you might know, who engaged in covert intelligence operations for the Nazis during this time. And she's an interesting figure. I could go on and on about her, but that's not really the point of today's webinar. Now today, we see, I mean, it's quite interesting because from 1947 to the 21st century, there weren't actually too many connections between some of the Hindutva ideologues and European and North American far-right movements. But we have really seen a resurgence within the past 10 years or so in their ties. Primarily, we see this today online through the sharing of disinformation and conspiracy theories related to Muslims, particularly spiked during the coronavirus pandemic. For instance, I was tracking a number of far-right actors and activists in Europe and North America who were sharing disinformation about Muslims as super spreaders of COVID in India, and sort of using that to reinforce their own agendas and tropes about Muslims. And, of course, we also see some very common shared anti-left-wing narratives, right? Targeting of academics, journalists, and activists, which is something that is shared between, these different far-right movements. And this takes place across many different social media platforms. So I think while most of us might be familiar with some of these far-right actors and users on like Twitter or Facebook or WhatsApp, I've also been tracking some of these more fringe online platforms like Telegram, 4chan, 8chan, some of these platforms that most of the public doesn't really use that often on a daily basis. But those spaces, I've been able to track a lot of really like shared content between Indian and European far-right users. And I was actually thinking about Vidya's reference to love jihad narratives as well. And although love jihad is not really a term that's used amongst Western far-right actors, I'm actually trying to work on this in my own research, but the depiction of Muslim male hypersexuality, this depiction of Muslim women as being oppressed and submissive, is often used within Western far-right actors in terms of like the so-called grooming activities of Muslim men against white girls in Europe and the US. But in the West, it's used as an argument for them to talk about themselves in superior terms. The Western far right see themselves as being gender equal, quote unquote, and using Western neoliberal norms to advance their agendas. And then in terms of offline grassroots ties as well, we see this quite often in intellectual circles. So one example is Arctus Media, which is a far-right publishing house. And it was founded by a Swedish white nationalist named Daniel Friberg in India. And I thought it was quite interesting that he decided to create this publishing house in India. And they often translate a lot of texts in Indian languages for their Western audiences. Arctus Media has since moved from its headquarters in India to Hungary in Eastern Europe because its founders saw a potential space while Hungary was sort of on its ascent and its rise under Viktor Orban in terms of far-right popularity. And then another example of an intellectual powerhouse is Countercurrents, which is a blog based in the US by the white nationalist, Greg Johnson, who actually maintains an archive of all of Savitri Devi's writings. So, I mean, I don't think most Western far-right actors are too familiar with these sort of intellectual Hindutva ideologues, but there is a space there and you can find it in the fact that they're being supported by white nationalists in the West is something that should be of concern. And then ultimately, I want to talk about how some of these connections are also taking place at state diplomatic levels as well, not just at the grassroots or online. I've written about a case of mostly far-right members of the European Parliament who visited Jammu and Kashmir, as well as Modi in Delhi in October 2019, which we know is quite controversial since Indian MPs and journalists couldn't even access the region at the time. And these members of the European Parliament, they stated that the purpose of their trip was to support India in its defense against terrorism, trying to survey the landscape of Kashmiri separatists and Pakistan state-sponsored terrorism. But again, this was an unofficial visit that was actually organized by Indian diaspora lobbyists based in Brussels, who are part of this much larger pro-Indian influence operations network around the world. Now, what was the outcome of this? Well, these members of the European Parliament later called for a bill to be withdrawn from the European Parliament regarding India's passage of the CAA bill, which they cited to be an internal matter, a domestic matter related to India, and that international actors should not get involved. So that was sort of like an outcome of that trip. And so I just want to end by maybe focusing very briefly, just thinking about how the far right in Europe is compared to India. By and large, I mean, the far right in Europe is still very much on the fringe when we compare it to India. It's not as mainstream, it's not as popular, but that doesn't mean that it's not a presence, nor that it's growing. It's certainly growing. And when we're speaking about the rise of power and how the far right sort of succeeds at the ballot box, what we see in Europe is that there's a very strong partnership between these sort of mainstream center-right parties and these far-right or extreme-right parties. And that influences governments, and this manifests in issues like immigration, border control, and sort of the securitization of marginalized communities. So just not a very optimistic note to end on, but something to think about when we talk about what leads to the rise and to the success of the far-right at the mainstream level. So I'm really looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you very much for this very informative introduction. So I'd like to ask Justin to speak next. So Justin, you bring the global anti-imperialist perspective beyond India and EU specifically. So I was apart from a general view of that, I was wondering whether, the violent populist movements that we see also elsewhere, if they should be somehow understood in the same light, or or should they be, looked at through a different lens? For example, violent Islamist movements. And when Vidya was talking about how young boys become co-opted in these kind of movements because they get specific, they get recognition in quotes from the community, they get importance. And I have read exactly the same words spoken by people who were recruited into the ISIS. And I've heard, as she said, the same words from interviews with these cow vigilantes in India. So clearly, some of the motivation is sort of similar, but should we sort of analyze also the political violence in some parts of Latin America, etc.? And is it even useful to talk about labeling these movements as far right or not? So please, Justin.
Thank you. It's really an honor to be on this panel. I'm really grateful to be on here with you guys. So I'm just gonna say 4 things that I think people often get wrong about the right, okay? And most of these are common to, in my reading, common to all of these global march of the far right that seems to be going on. And I think the reason a lot of people get these things wrong is because for the most part, the paradigm for ultra right-wing movements is always the Nazis in Germany. So the Nazis in Germany, World War II, that's the paradigm. That's what right-wing means. But that's, there are several ways that historically the Nazis were a little bit different from the global right wing as it developed over several centuries. So first of all, if you think the right wing, the global right wing today is the German Nazis, you're going to imagine a kind of hyper patriotism, like our country comes first before all other countries. But in today's right wing, in India or Brazil or elsewhere, remember that the right-wing utopia is one where everybody knows their place. That's what right-wing, that's what the right wing is all about. It's about everybody knowing their place. And so for Brazil, for example, Bolsonaro, the right wing in Brazil, understands their place to be beneath the United States. They're militant about that. Bolsonaro salutes the American flag. Bolsonaro marches under the Israeli flag. So, whereas, the Nazis' hyper-patriotism, thinking that Germans were superior, got them in some trouble with the US and with the British Empire, you can't expect that to happen with the right wing today. They're not going to get in any trouble with the US. Everything that they do is subordinate to the US. Economically, you won't see Brazil or India trying to build up their national economies. They will follow the neoliberal precepts. They will cut their public sector. They'll cut their taxes. They'll reduce their patent protections. They'll do any of those things that the US economy wants them to do, or corporate actors want them to do. Second of all, I'd like to say, when you think of Nazi Germany, you think of the chaos and destruction of World War I, and you think of how Hitler exploited, the destruction, the indemnity, all of the economic chaos that was a consequence of Germany's defeat in World War I. Well, so you might think like the right wing today is working off of some kinds of legitimate grievances, right? You hear that, but Corey Robin's book about conservatism, I think one of the main teachings for me from that book is that conservatives, right-wingers, oppose whatever progress, whatever the left is doing, no matter how weak the left is, no matter how legitimate the left is, no matter how strong the right is or the status quo is, conservatives will militantly oppose the left in any situation. So that goes back to the French Revolution. Edmund Burke. So, you know, that's why the US right wing is so incensed about things like trans rights, Black Lives Matter, even though, you know, Black Lives Matter is so far from being able to do anything like defund police or, you know, address any of the police abuses that are rampant in the US. You know, the right wing in the US mobilizes on that issue. They, you know, they mobilize on the defense of their police, right? Like Blue Lives Matter. So it's a mistake to understand the right wing, the rise of the right wing as a response to some kinds of legitimate grievances. The grievances could be legitimate or not. It has nothing to do with how they campaign or why. So trying to go in there and address the right wing, you know, the so-called legitimate grievances of the right wing, I think is politically mistaken. The legitimacy of right-wing movements, this is my third point, is entirely negative. So if you think about the way governments, whether it was in India or in Latin America, in North America, they would always draw a certain legitimacy from their ability to create jobs, from their ability to, you know, create some kind of economic development. That would be, you know, can the government deliver economically? That would always be some kind of criteria. And, you know, to do that, there would be some emphasis on science, some belief in progress. And that was, you know, historically, again, you know, especially through the 40s and 50s and 60s into the 70s, from the 80s. What the right wing is about now, they don't care about science or even technological progress, as long as that, if those things risk their narrative control or their perception. So, you know, India is looking at refusing 5G. All of the powers, all of the right-wing kind of countries of the world are turning down 5G. They're turning down Chinese vaccines because China is the right-wing boogeyman right now. China, and, you know, to a lesser extent, Russia. You know, anything that China does must be opposed by the right wing, right? Like Steve Bannon's obsessed with China. A lot of the right-wing networks, the Victims of Communism Foundation is obsessed with China, right? With Chinese communism, right? The Miami Cubans are obsessed with Castro and communism in Venezuela. So it's all about negative legitimacy. It's about who you're against. So again, you know, Hitler would say, like, we're getting the economy going again, we're making the trains run on time, but they don't, the right wing today doesn't have that. They don't even try. Bolsonaro refused 11 offers of vaccines over the past year. It doesn't hurt them politically to be completely mismanaging or, you know, allowing hundreds of thousands of people to die in their countries. That doesn't really affect their support on the right, because the right is all about all about making sure the people are in their place, and all about making sure that people who don't know their place are punished. And as long as that's happening, whether it's like financially through budget cuts or austerity, or physically through violence, that right-wing politics is, you know, beast is being fed, it's being appeased. And part of the reason this works is because parties and politics to the left of them, like centrists, also have abandoned the idea of delivering any kind of development goods. They all cite the impossibility of doing that. You know, everybody does a little bit of austerity. Even in Brazil, the Workers' Party, you know, when things were going well, they would divide the growth. But as soon as there's a crisis, they're not willing to take on wealthy and powerful interests in order to, say, raise taxes or take any of the measures that might affect entrenched economic power. And as a result, they alienate their own constituency. They alienate working people and poor people that would have supported them. They kind of tell them to demobilize, and that leaves the field open for, in the case of Brazil, a right-wing coup by the Bolsonaro people. And last, the specific role of technology, WhatsApp, the giant tech platforms, and I'd highly recommend Cory Doctorow. People, I hope you've read, like, and Shoshana Zuboff's The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, but Cory Doctorow has a kind of review of that, which is a book in itself. It's like 100 pages. It's a long read, but it's worth it. And he talks about how it's all about monopoly power, and the specific monopoly power of these tech giants, Facebook, which has WhatsApp, which was so prominent in the rise of the right in India and Brazil. And Steve Bannon's operations on these networks. What they do, they don't really brainwash people. That's the mistake. They help people find each other. So they enable people to aggregate themselves and organize themselves. And they do that for the right, and they disrupt that for the left. They specifically, they'll take Palestinians or pro-Palestine messages right off of their platforms. They'll cut their talks. Zoom has done that in the past. They will, they'll take the hashtag Resign Modi hashtag was trending. Facebook specifically took those posts down. The Modi government asked Twitter to remove posts that were overly critical of their handling of COVID. So when you have monopoly power and it's a little bit biased, even a slight bias towards allowing the Steve Bannon kind of networks to aggregate, and a slight bias towards shutting down left-wing Twitter, you're going to have significant effects from that and ripple effects from that. So that one is a harder nut to crack, in the sense that people are always fighting to get out of Facebook jail or Twitter jail or whatever. But I don't know, the fight for the open internet, the fight against monopolies is probably at least something that we have to pay attention to if we're gonna address the continuous rise of right-wing politics. So I'll stop there and we can discuss from that point on.
Thank you very much, Justin. This was very interesting perspective. And I would now like to call on Apoorvanand. And it will be nice if you can tell us about your perspective, commenting also on the way the far right has also established itself in the academia in India, which is not yet the case, let's say, in Europe specifically. I don't know so much about West in general, but it seems to be sort of true. But in India, the intellectual space used to be occupied by the left and center, and this is slowly changing. So that will be your perspective on that. Also, would be very interesting. And also, if you could touch upon issues of academic freedom, that would be interesting. So please, Apoorvanand.
Thank you very much. And thank you for having me here and share my thoughts about what the right wing or far right is doing or rising, and how it is rising in the present day India. The earlier talks were very useful, and I won't repeat that, but I agree largely with the formulation of Justin, and I would like you to keep that in mind because that is very useful, the framing, the way he framed the whole thing. And the most significant and crucial part of that was to remember your place in the scheme of things and to show others their place. That is the key formulation of Justin, key to understand how Indian right works. And why it is key? Because Indian mind, in a way, has been programmed by the caste system. And what is Indian caste system? Indian caste system is to know your place in the order of things and and to tell others about their place, and not to disturb this order. So this is how it works, and it has not changed. So it is it does draw inspiration from Mussolini. It does draw inspiration from the Nazi Germany, and the earlier theorists of Hindutva and the Hindu far right were very much influenced by fascism. But we must not fall prey to understand the way people generally try to understand Indian right is to place them and juxtapose them with Italian or German fascism. This is not how Indian fascism or Indian far right works. It doesn't aspire to eliminate. It aspires to subjugate and permanently subjugate Muslims and Christians, and also tell Dalits and others to know their place in the social system. So how it works? It works to many ways. One is violence, active violence. Second, now since it is in power, and it is in power for the last 7 years, and it has been in power in many states for more than a quarter century, like Gujarat or Madhya Pradesh or Rajasthan, it has been in power for 20 years, 25 years, 30 years. So it works through law. One is violence, active violence, and the first speaker talked about that, how active violence is used to terrorize Muslims and Christians, I would say. She didn't mention Christians, but Christians are very much targeted and constantly targeted by the Hindu far right. It's not reported. So first is violence. Second is law. So laws are being made. For example, now in India, you have triple talaq law, which has made effectively desertion of your wife a criminal offense for Muslim men. So they can be jailed for 3 years for deserting their wife by pronouncing triple talaq, 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 talaq. But this is very discriminatory because a Hindu man or Hindu husband or a Jain husband or Bauddha husband can desert his wife and still not face this law. So it's clearly to tell Muslim men to discipline them and to also humiliate them by telling them that, well, we are protecting your women. Your women are oppressed by you, and we are protecting them. And all Muslim men are potential criminals. That is how, and there are other laws as well. For example, 4 state assemblies have passed laws, or 4 state governments have passed laws recently criminalizing interreligious marriage. And so if you marry a woman of, and let's simplify it, of belonging to Hindu religion, and she changes her religion, then it's a criminal act. And you have to inform the district magistrate, take the permission of the authority before changing your religion. So effectively what it does, it turns any communion between a Muslim and Hindu into a criminal act. So laws like these are being enacted by states and center. And there are other laws. For example, the way Article 370 was diluted and Jammu and Kashmir was bifurcated and degraded. This was again to send out a message to Muslims across India that a Muslim majority state won't be allowed to live. So Muslims cannot have political power anywhere in India. That was the message sent by degrading Jammu and Kashmir and by bifurcating it. Third is propaganda, using media and different kinds of media constantly propagating an image of Muslim as violent. So if you see Muslim congregation, or if you see Muslims organizing themselves, they are potentially violent people. So an individual Muslim can be a good person, but if you see a Muslim collective, it is bound to be violent, it is bound to be vicious, and you have to be very alert about Muslims organizing themselves in any form. So if Muslims form a political party and try to lead a political party, for example, Badruddin Ajmal in Assam, or Indian Muslim League in Kerala, or elsewhere, if a Muslim is leading a political party, then Hindus are told that, well, this is the beginning of end of India, because Muslims cannot be allowed to hold the position of power, a crucial position of power. So they can be given ceremonial role, but to imagine a Muslim as chief minister in a state or prime minister of India is impossible. And then a scare is raised. So this constant propaganda. Fourth is elections. Since changes take place, or change takes place in India only through elections. So what do you do through elections? You create majoritarian majority. Because what you do, it's a game of numbers. So you try to mobilize Hindus on a platform, and you try to solidify it and turn it into a permanent majority. So this is the root of election. You asked me to talk about what is happening in academia. So what the Bharatiya Janata Party has done effectively, and why it has been able to do that, is that it has support, or it works under the umbrella of Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, which I call an ecosystem. It has hundreds of organizations, and some of them are very critical to understand. One is Vidya Bharati, which is chain of educational institutions, Saraswati Shishu Mandir, and then there are institutions connected to Dayanand Anglo-Vedic schools or colleges, which are tangentially or somehow affiliated to the ideology of Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. So it makes an educational ecosystem. It's a parallel educational system which keeps churning out people who are essentially anti-Muslim and anti-Christian. And I put it very starkly. What is Hindutva in India? Hindutva in India is to make a Hindu or manufacture a Hindu who is anti-Muslim and anti-Christian, who hates Muslim, who looks at a Muslim with suspicion and Christian with suspicion. This is you would call simplistic, but this is the definition we must keep in mind. And this is what Saraswati Shishu Mandir and all other educational institutions and their publications are constantly doing and have been doing for last more than 90 years. We must keep this in mind. So many of them have entered our educational institutions and are there. They were lying dormant. But this ascendance of Bharatiya Janata Party and capturing of power by Bharatiya Janata Party at the center has allowed it to have its men as vice chancellors and directors of the institutions. And what they have been doing, and you can take the example of Jawaharlal Nehru University, which was considered to be a left bastion. But what has been done in the last 4 years is that the vice chancellor appointed by this government has managed to appoint more than 300 faculty at different positions who are closely aligned with Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, and not only aligned with Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, but I tell it with sense of responsibility and from the information that I get from my colleagues of Jawaharlal Nehru University, that most of them are hooligans. So, and this is what is happening across India, is to appoint people from the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh background, Akhil Bharatiya Vidyarthi Parishad background, as faculty members, and give administrative positions to people belonging to Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. And what people heading institutions like the apex body that looks after higher education, University Grant Commission, if they toe the line of Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, so they have centralized curriculum making and they have nationalized curriculum making. So if you go to the site of University Grant Commission and if you look what is the curriculum design of history, which is to be taught at undergrad level across India, Sanskrit and other subjects, they are largely framed the way RSS would like them to be framed, Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. They are very much nationalistic and they are very much informed by the RSS way of thinking. I will take 1 or 2 minutes more to say that again, this is by using agencies which overseer or overlook the educational affairs of India. So Central Board of School Education, NCERT, which designs school textbooks, different textbook committees in states. And then I had mentioned violence earlier. Violence is also used to subjugate or to discipline people on campuses. And this work is done by the student wing of Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, Akhil Bharatiya Vidyarthi Parishad. If you are holding a seminar, if you are holding a film screening, Akhil Bharatiya Vidyarthi Parishad people will come and disrupt it. And there is another way academic people are disciplined, by filing criminal cases against them. So one is active violence. Second is if you write a book, if you write an article, so cases would be filed against you in different courts of India. And it would be very difficult for you as an academic to go and fight these cases at 100 places. So what it ends up doing is silencing these academics. And what has happened in these 7 years, and you can go and talk to the scholars who are teaching outside India, when they write their books, their publishers tell them to have an Indian edition which won't have content which can irritate these nationalists. So a dilution of knowledge content or academic content is taking place at the same time. I have not finished, but this is how the far right is working. It's working in very many ways, as I said, using active violence, using law, using elections, using propaganda, using legitimate means. For example, I can always go and file a case against you and you cannot hold it against me. I would say, well, I have used the law of the land. So where is the problem? You go and fight the case. What it ends up doing is harassing you and you start self-censoring yourself. So there is this fear of violence, there is this fear of law, and then you are also painted as enemy of the nation. And many scholars have been jailed. For last 3 years, we have Sudha Bharadwaj in jail. We have our colleague Hani Babu in jail. We have Anand Tumde in jail. We have Umar Khalid in jail. We have many PhD scholars in jail. So all intellectuals are painted as anti-nationals, and it's a fair game to jail them. Nobody is going to regret that. So I stop here.
So thank you very much for this very illuminating and passionate let's call it speech. So now we pass on to questions and discussions. And before taking questions from the audience, I would like to ask all of you sort of, it's not quite a question, but I would like to invite comments on something which is very close to my heart, which is the gender issue. So Justin said that one characteristic of the right is that they always oppose the left. And this is sort of, superficially contradictory to what Eviane said about the right in Europe, sort of trying to justify itself, saying that we are the champions of LGBTQ rights. And also we have seen examples from India where the right is trying to say that, we are the champion of women's rights because we are saving Muslim women from their own men. Also, they try to, I would say, pretend, right, to be anti-casteist, saying that Hindus are all the same and caste system exists, but all castes are equal, or very strange sort of, contortion, let's say mental contortion. So I would like to have, all of you maybe give your comments on that perspective. Maybe Vidya, you could start by telling me what would be your take on that.
So, for example, what we have seen here is for some time now, the weaponizing of the burqa. So if there is a student who wears a burqa, and many young girls in Mangalore, where I live, wear the burqa, it ensures that they go get a good education, etc. So not only do you have right-wing, lumpen elements calling this out, you even have, convent schools, etc., saying yes, we must stop the burqa, etc. And then you have conservatives within the Muslim community also using it as a rallying call. So there's a weaponizing of the burqa on both sides. And we need to realize that this is how competitive our public spaces have become. And so this constant dialoguing with Muslim women friends of ours continues, even as we push back and say, if you can allow a Sikh to wear a turban, why not a burqa? If a nun can be wearing a habit, why not a burqa in your college, etc. When there was an interesting phenomena which they keep trying to bring up time and again about appropriate dressing for women who walk into temples. Otherwise, apparently, they distract people who have come, devotees who've come there to pray. And this made quite a buzz, and a lot of our temples were putting up these posters saying women must come in saris only to temples, not even salwar kurta, but saris. And finally, I think I shut up quite a few because I said, okay, but I am completely distracted by the priest over there. He's half naked and I cannot concentrate on God then. So a lot of it died down after that. So I think using pushback and humor, I think, I remember we had this whole thing where we said, I can't even remember what it was, but we basically said the Kiss of Love campaign. So we had this campaign where we said, okay, we meet in a public place and we have the Kiss of Love campaign. And Mr. Pramod Mutalik of the Sri Ram Sena was very, very angry and was giving us, tirades and lectures on, what Indian Sanskriti and culture is and what is, and told me, you are not like an Indian woman. And I said, Mr. Mutalik, please come to our protest tomorrow morning. I will be the first to come up to you and hug and kiss you. So please come. So basically, I think not moving back, but it has been difficult. Because, for example, what we saw to young environmental activists, everything can be used by this regime, by any right-wing regime, actually. So even an innocuous kind of social media guide is called a toolkit, and that is also weaponized in some way. And you had young climate activists, really running for their lives in a way. So, and we have seen that there's always been a close, camaraderie between not just, the very powerful, but even smaller industrial houses or real estate players and the right, because the rank and file of their foot soldiers, they use the same. I've seen it in fights that we've had to save the river, being taken over by the Mangalore SEZ, in other fights. Always the beefed up boys are the Bajrang Dal boys that the industry brings. So I think that problematic view of the woman is something that we can also use, because like as an activist on the ground, I'm always thinking, how do we grapple with this and not just talk about it, but how do we grapple with this? So every time I'm face to face with somebody who's talking such regressive stuff and very aggressively because I'm a woman, then I'm always trying to engage in a conversation and trying to open up that space a little. I know it's not very successful, but I think we need to try, because quite often many of these people, of the boys especially, who become very violent, some of them are very young, 17, 18, and they don't know better, actually. They haven't had a healthy conversation with any girl. They don't know it's not cool to behave like this or talk like this. So somehow we have to make it unfashionable that they talk or think like this, because right now it's fashionable. It's fashionable to be a Bajrang Dal bloke talking about women and cows in the same breath. It really pays you off, because it'll get you your next biryani and your liquor during an election, and it will get you more jobs, like the local industry or the real estate guy will hire you to do his scaring of people on the ground. So it really pays in so many ways. You are a social media star, so really you consolidate through social media, through all these anti-women statements that you make. And I think constantly somehow saying this is not cool, this is not done, you are in the Middle Ages, somehow communicating that to these young people is very important. And the young people are really scary, because they are the really, really aggressive lot. So when you when I'm faced with the convener of the Bajrang Dal or the Hindu Jagran Vedike, I do not feel any nervousness. I'm so confident in talking to them. But the minute I'm faced with a 16, 17-year-old Bajrang Dal child, then I am like, he can hit out and do anything with those around me. And I think somehow we have not worked on this enough. Whether it's Gauraksha also, we know it has such a, where there was so much problem from the end of the 19th century on Gauraksha, etc. They saw that the Indian National Congress was also, I remember in my place, they were having district level cow protection committees, etc. So, and now we are seeing that even the Congress, which is of course not so much of an opposition anymore, but all the opposition is sort of flowing in the same direction. So if they want the Ram temple or any other temple done, we are also going a temple hopping. the opposition. So there is no real opposition. We are the opposition. The people on the street need to make people see sense. And what Justin said also triggered another thought. What we are seeing in Bengal, we had the left almost partner with the BJP to see that the TMC was destroyed. So I think there are all kinds of mistakes we are making on all kinds of levels. And we need to really rethink how we are approaching this. Yeah.
I think Apoorvanand will have a lot of things to say about the last statement, but maybe I would call upon like Justin, Eviane, and Apoorvanand to maybe comment first on this gender question that we started with.
Well, yeah, I'll jump in. There's like gender and Islam and China, and it's really important not to get mixed up and think, or anti-Semitism too is another one, to get mixed up and think that any of this means anything to right-wingers. So the Israeli right is happy to partner with anti-Semites in Europe. They do it all the time. The Islamic State, when they accidentally shelled Israel, apologized. They sent a formal apology to Israel, which Israel more or less accepted. Okay, so the Islamic State, which is supposed to hate Jews, etc., based on their ideology. The Islamic State ideology is basically the same as Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is the great friend of liberal US, right? The US is, the US right wing hates gay, is opposed to gay and trans rights. Then they find out that they're supposed to hate Muslims, so they hate Muslims because Muslims oppose gay and trans rights. And then now China is claimed to be oppressing Muslims in Xinjiang, so they hate China for oppressing Muslims. They're standing up for Muslim rights, which of course they would never do in Kashmir. So what's really going on here? Again, it's like any of these things are just issues. They're just slogans. The overall politics is, like I said, fundamentally about people knowing their place, people keeping to their place. Any particular issue, whether it's feminism or trans rights or Islam or China, these can come and go. And they will say anything that's convenient. They're free to contradict themselves because the politics isn't really about politics never is really about formulating a logical and consistent program and then putting it for like left-wing people, like communists. That's what we always believe, right? We always believe that it's like get the politics, get the political line correct, and then give that education to the people, and we'll mobilize and we'll move forward. But that's not really how, or that might be how politics works. So that might be how we want it to work. But there are other things going on. And right-wing politics is about just opposing any kind of progress, change, equality at any stage, in any way, in any venue, using any argument, using any fact or lie to do so. And so just that's when you say like there seems to be a contradiction, yeah, of course there's a contradiction, because what's really going on is their politics are not based on the things that they're saying. A lot of what they're saying is just signaling to each other things that may not make sense if you don't know.
I'm just tempted to jump in for a minute, only if Kheya allows me.
If I could actually call on Anand, who had a question, to ask his question, and then maybe we have 15 minutes left, and then maybe you could start, wrapping up and also at the same time answering the question. So anyone, please.
Well, I just wanted to offer a thought based on what Vidya and Justin had said. This is more, I guess, of an academic reflection on this, but I absolutely agree with what they said, just to make that clear, which is your original question about this gendered aspect. And Justin's quite right in pinpointing that this is part of a much larger agenda, of course, which is, particularly within Hindutva, and this is something I find really interesting compared to other Western far-right movements, and this is specific, but, within Hindutva, notions like feminism is something viewed to be quote unquote foreign, right? And it's something that's imported from the West. And then they use these claims of indigenous knowledge, authentic knowledge that sort of predates any type of colonial influence in order to really help construct their mythology of being like the pure people and et cetera. But by positioning themselves as quote unquote indigenous and sort of unpolluted from foreign influence, despite the fact we know this isn't really the case, this really allows them for circumventing any critique that Hindutva is oppressive, because they argue that social hierarchies and authoritarianism are supposedly natural expressions of the human order, right? So just what Justin was saying in terms of social dominance. And we see this with Western far-right movements as well, because as I mentioned in my talk, I said gender equality in quotes, right? They don't necessarily promote feminism or LGBT rights, but it's just a way of sort of justifying their own quote, superiority in order to instill that social dominance that Justin was referring to. So that was my reflection on that topic.
Yeah, thanks. So Anuman, if you could ask your question, then maybe I'll call on Apoorvanand to try to answer your question and my question together, and then we start to wrap up.
Perfect. Thank you for this opportunity. I have two quick questions. One is to Professor Apoorvanand, and I will begin with this. So you have brought an important aspect of RSS strategy to have numerous social and cultural offshoot groups, since last many decades. And this in the light of the fact that it was banned in 1948. And it seems that over the last decades, it helped it to do the social, cultural capturing before the eventual political consolidation by BJP in 2014, which in the hindsight looks only obvious. So why do you think the liberal secular front ignored these important aspects? Was it ignorance or plain laziness? Or how do you rebuild from here now, in India as well as in the Indian diaspora along these lines? And my second question is to Vidya. So you talked about the problematic that Indian men have trouble engaging a decent conversation with women, So is it somewhere to be linked that the men-women contact is prevented right from the childhood, even at schools, with separate roads, at the public buses, So is it really a surprise then that when they become adults, they are clueless, men as well as women? Thanks.
So Apoorvanand, please.
Yeah. So first, let me address the earlier, add my voice to the earlier discussion we were having about gender. And I tend to agree with Justin, where he says that we need to understand, especially Indian far right, differently, because Indian far right is very, very opportunistic. But maybe we can, if we read the essay, Our Fascism of Umberto Eco, we would be able to understand how Indian far right works, because it compromises, it contradicts itself, and it's not consistent, and we try to find consistency. We try to say that it's upper caste, Hindu male-dominated organization, and then you see a Narendra Modi emerging, which is an OBC person and dominating the RSS rise. So RSS compromises, RSS backtracks, retracts from its position. RSS takes opportunistic positions on many questions. And what it is a very fuzzy thing, and we have to understand how it works. So when we try to understand how gender, the relation of gender and this politics, we need to understand that RSS has always maintained that we Hindus were traditionally modern. So we do not need to import modernism or modernity from the West, because we have been traditionally modern. So all modern ideas were already there, and we had women leaders among us. So it's not that women are secondary, women are on the top, and we have these women goddesses. And so it's not that we don't revere women. So it's reverse gendering. And that's why if you look at this RSS scene or the Hindutva scene today, you will find many rabid women preachers and women propagandists and women who actively incite violence in India. For example, the violence that rocked Northwest Delhi last year was led by women at many places, and they were very, very aggressive. So we have to understand how RSS plays with this whole gender thing, and we cannot understand it in neat categories because it always creates a messiness about it. So one is that. So you have Durga Vahini, and you have a new thing, which I don't know whether you are aware of or not, but it originated in Jharkhand, and it has spread to Bihar, and it is spreading to Uttar Pradesh as well. It's called Shiv Charcha. Shiv is again a god. And interestingly, the Shiv Charcha is mainly a women-centric thing. So women participate in the Shiv Charcha, and it has become a vehicle for spreading the ideology of Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. These are voluntary associations of women. These are like kitty parties. Women come together, sing bhajans, and the ideology of RSS keeps spreading. These are voluntary networks, and you won't find RSS there. So we need to also study how these networks are working. Now I come to the question that was posed here. I would say laziness, and I would say overconfidence. That since Indian society is very diverse and it's divided into so many castes, so a macro identity would never be able to homogenize these identities. And what led us into stupa or a kind of misunderstanding was the social justice movement. And it led to a misunderstanding that, well, now this caste politics has come to stay, this identity politics, and the other backward caste people and the scheduled caste people, they are never part of the mainstream Hindu order. And for them to have their political voice, they will have to fight with the Bharatiya Janata Party. But Bharatiya Janata Party and RSS understood it very well. And what it did, it fragmented the OBC, that is other backward caste identity, and scheduled caste identity into hundreds of units. So you have one Rajbhar, you have one Paswan, you have one Dusad, you have one Pasi, and RSS is negotiating with each unit, each one of them, and promising them a place in the order. That is how it worked. It negotiated with these fragments and turned them into part of this large Hindu umbrella. And that is how it broke the power of social justice, or it turned the social justice politics on its head. So I would say secular politics was very complacent, and it didn't pay attention to the way RSS ideology was spreading through these networks I mentioned earlier. And it thought that we would be able to control political power using these means. That is by negotiating with or by playing identity politics. But RSS also played identity politics, co-opted all of them in its fold, and they were very happy, because if it was all about getting a share in power, then BJP was ready to give it to them. RSS was ready to give it to them. And there it compromised. And we couldn't understand, because it contradicted our understanding of RSS. That is, it is an upper caste, male, north-centric Hindu organization. So it was happy to promote a Dalit, it was happy to promote an OBC, it was happy to promote a woman if need be. The only condition was that the primary thing should remain there. That is, Muslims and Christians must be kept in their place.
Thank you very much. Before passing the mic to Vidya, I would just like to ask all of you if you are in a hurry or whether we are able to, we have some leeway in extending by a few minutes. Is that all right? Then we have a little bit more time, and Vidya, please go ahead and answer Anuban's question, and then we can go on a bit more with the conversation.
Yes. So, of course, what the person who questioned us, the answer is in the question. We know our families are completely non-democratic. You know, whether we are Hindu or Muslim or any other denomination, there is an inherent lack of democracy within our families. Things are changing, but changing too slowly. I'll go back to what is famously called the homestay attack from a few years ago, where boys and girls who were celebrating a birthday party were attacked by the Hindu Jagran Vedike boys. And we tried to do a social analysis of these boys, and we discovered of the handful 10 to 12 boys, there were about 6 of them had no electricity even in their house, and no pakka house, and most of them were unemployed, which is why they get sucked into these kinds of places where, then they become warriors of the faith, warriors of culture, and they get this kind of elevation. They also, so there's a lot of money also that keeps them in the loop. And therefore, well, if they are told that, women are not behaving right and are with men of a different religion, then they will go out and sort of, and they groped the girls, they hit the girls, and they were so wild. So definitely it's a problem, but even when I speak with our friends of the Muslim community, I try to tell them that things have to become different there also, because while we have such articulate young women all around me who happen to be Muslim, they will get married off early. There is a lack of articulation in the public sphere. If they want to be a camera person or something, they are not allowed to be. If they want to start a business or work somewhere, these women who are highly educated cannot even take up jobs. Because remember, in my place, it's not a very, very poor Muslim community here. Therefore, the competitive politics, perhaps, because there is a little bit of power and wealth even on the Muslim side. So there is this ideal situation for violence and conflict to be played out. I also wanted to be opportunistic when Justin was talking, and that was exactly the word that Professor Apoorvanand said, that basically they're opportunists. Like, we've seen how during this whole, the first wave of COVID, right? We banned all those goddamn apps, and we were so nationalistic and anti-Chinese about it. And we said we will not even get anything for the power sector. A lot of it comes from China. And when we look, all the operators in all our major power sector, coal, thermal power plants, everything is coming from China. And it continues to this day. So really the kind of public posturing and what the government of the day is doing is exactly what Justin said, that they will say one thing and do another thing all the time, and they will treat you like, they will say that as per our culture, we treat you as a goddess, but definitely that is not the thing that we see played out. You do not trample upon your goddess and hit her until her hearing is 60% impaired, which is what happened at the homestay attack. And you don't grope them, and you don't tell them off in the way that we have experienced. And every time a woman has an opinion on something, like whether it's climate, whether it's energy, whether it's something else, whether it's administration or anything, then they'll try to fob you off saying, why are you talking about all of this? Why don't you talk about family planning? And then they want to attack the Muslim with that. So this talking down at the woman is very, very irritating. And I think we need to be more articulate, because somehow what Professor Apoorvanand said is very true, that there is the Durga Vahini, which is so strong. So every time, for example, when we are approaching Valentine's Day, sorry, the lights went out, but when we are approaching Valentine's Day, we try to push the authorities to see that the VHP and the Bajrang Dal don't take over our city. But you have the Durga Vahini that actually will be standing outside colleges, distributing pamphlets saying it's against our culture, do not celebrate Valentine's Day, and scaring off these young girls and boys who want to just enjoy a day, which is, so, and every time there is an important thing that if as a woman activist you want to articulate, then they will bring on the Durga Vahini with all the same violent, medievalistic, thought and pressure on us. So it's very, very disconcerting. The other group that we must also talk about is the Vanvasi Kalyan Ashram. Professor Apoorvanand talked of so many. It's a many-headed creature, the sun, and of course that's why they call it the Parivar. So one very insidious creature within the Parivar is the Vanvasi Kalyan Ashram, which goes and works with the tribals and really sort of brings them in. We have seen through COVID, and what we are experiencing right now. And yesterday we had a very important voice of the BJP nationally, who happens to be from Bangalore, read out a list of 17 names who happen to be all Muslim from the COVID war room of the Bangalore municipality, saying that is this what they're doing? This is the bed scam. That's why people are not getting beds. Is this a madrasa, etc.? And today we find out that there are 212 people in that war room, and only 17 of them happen to be Muslim. And those are the very names that he chooses to call out. We know that our Muslim friends have been out there risking their lives and the health of their family, feeding people, getting them beds, giving plasma, etc. And they're being vilified day in and day out. And I think the government has done nothing but let us down. And this is like really insult on injury. But basically, that's what they're doing. They're just playing and messing with our minds all the time.
Thank you, Vidya, for this very impassionate discourse, and yes, bringing to our attention all these awful things which are happening like right now back home. So before I call on, I think I will go in the order: Justin, Eviane, Apoorvanand, and Vidya. And I would like, Justin and Vidya, Justin and Eviane, you haven't commented on the ongoing topic. Please do so, and also if you can, and also integrate your closing statement. And I would like to remind all of you that this summit is taking place in the context of the diplomatic India-EU summit. And we intend at the end to try and set out a set of sort of recommendations to to both the Indian and the European government as to what are the areas of cooperation or sort of set out a roadmap also perhaps for the people of EU and India. So if you could keep that in mind while with the rest of the discussion while saying your closing remarks, that would be very nice. Thank you. Please, Justin.
I think there are some dynamics that are unique to India. So the Bengal election, I think it was Vidya who said, you know, the strategy by this CPM was such a poor one to focus, you know, like, oh, no. Historically, the way to fight the right, you know, there's different approaches, but generally the debate on the left is between one pole, which is broadly called the United Front, right? Which is to say, like, all the anti-fascist forces should unite. So if you're liberal or if you're left or whatever, you have to kind of form this united front. But historically speaking, again, a lot of these united fronts end up with some kind of falling out, let's say. So, you know, the Shanghai massacre of 1928 being probably the most dramatic, but, you know, united fronts often fall apart. And in the US and in the UK, the dynamic has been that the right has risen on basically the fact that the liberals would rather have the right wing than the left. So, you know, the way that the Democrats behaved to make sure they got rid of Bernie Sanders, which empowers the Republicans, or the way the right wing of Labour in the UK mobilized to make sure that Corbyn was destroyed from within, and, you know, through the media, the fake anti-Semitism stuff, whatever, all of that, which empowered, you know, the Boris Johnson, etc. So if you're looking for like a recommendation, you know, I would say if there is going to be a united front on the political side of things, then that responsibility is shared between the left and the liberals. So as long as liberals believe that it's better to have the right than the left, we're never gonna have the numbers to make it work. That, like, in a sense, it's the liberals that are holding up the right in a lot of these situations, because they would rather have them than the left. And so if we're going to formulate an anti-fascist or an anti-fascist politics, we've got to sort that out. Like, leftists and liberals have to sort out what they want. And as a leftist, you know, I blame the liberals. I feel like, you know, why do you hate us so much? You know, like, you're ultimately, the liberal institutions and liberal programs also suffer under fascism. And I try to constantly remind liberals that that's the case, that leftists are pretty good on liberal issues of freedom of speech and free expression and, you know, voting and assembly and stuff that generally benefits leftists. But liberals seem to be so afraid of, you know, anti-imperialist foreign policy, economic equality, redistributive programs, taxes, etc., that they empower the right wing. So I think that'll be my concluding remark.
Thank you very much, Justin, for this very forthright and comment. Effectively, I agree with you. And Eviane, over to you, please.
Great, thank you. Right, so just in terms of final concluding thoughts, I just had a couple of thoughts here related to our sort of ongoing discussion today. The first is that, of course, Hindutva and the far right in India is locally contextual. It's quite unique, and certainly the legacy of the caste system makes that so. So I'm not trying to argue against that at all. But what I have been trying to push forward is the recognition that there are connections to the West that should be understood as part of a much larger global effort of exclusionary forces at play. There is something universal happening. We see it across the world. And so what my work has been trying to focus on is to put this into a perspective that has by and large been dominated by European and North American forces, right? When people in Europe, North America think of the far right, they think about these neo-Nazis, right, as Justin had mentioned, or these skinheads. And so I think it's time to really try to push this into a much larger conversation and see these exclusionary forces as something that's global. The second point, which I don't have much time for, but it was also in reference to our earlier conversation about university spaces. And we do see that the European far right and the American far right is trying to hijack university spaces as well in the so-called culture wars. And this has been happening for decades. Also in Brazil as well, there's a lot of censoring of academics. What we see in Europe and in North America, these hijacking of university spaces. It's not perhaps say as successful as the Indian context, but it's still really important to keep an eye out in this area. But one prominent example that comes to mind is within Hungary, which is run by a far-right government under Viktor Orban, where initially a gender studies program was shut down and banned, and then the university was later dissolved and had to move locations to another country, to Vienna, right? So we do see this happening within Europe too. And then the last point I wanted to make was referenced earlier by Justin, which was also big tech monopoly and connected to the rise of the far right, particularly within India. With India's case, it's a very interesting, problematic love and hate relationship between the Indian government and big tech, right? They rely upon big tech, and so does big tech in terms of its market spread. But then, of course, now there's all these tensions ensuing, especially since the farmers' protests. So something to keep in mind. But also I wanted to point to a double standard when it comes to tech policies on hate speech and terrorism. These instruments that tech policies have developed to address hate speech and terrorism were done in response to ISIS and in response to Islamist extremism, but we have not seen that systematically applied to the far right. So that's something that I've been trying to push for in my work. And then just finally, just bear in mind that these big tech policies are designed in Silicon Valley for North American and European users, and the rest of the world is not seen as a priority in the application of these policies. And this has been information made public by tech employees who have said that they've been flagged about content in the global South, but it's not seen as a priority for the companies. So that's why they just focus on what's happening in Europe and North America. So those are my final three thoughts, but it was such a pleasure to be on this panel.
Thank you very much. So Apoorvanand, please, and in interest of time, if you could keep it relatively brief, we still have around 7 to 8 minutes.
Thank you. I agree with all the fellow panelists, and I won't repeat what they have said, but I'm not so sure as Justin is about the relationship between liberals and left, because in India, what has happened is that left has also been skeptical about the potential of democracy, of parliamentary democracy. So the legitimacy of parliamentary democracy has always been questioned by the left. And why has secularism weakened in India? Because in India, left has not shied, the official left or the parliamentary left. It has aligned with directly and indirectly the RSS, the political wing of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, earlier called Jan Sangh, in late 60s, and then Bharatiya Janata Party, Jan Sangh in late 60s, and then in mid 70s, and then in 80s. So left has allied with the right to keep Congress party out of power. So the primary aim of the left was to keep Congress party out of the power. And it did give strength to the Bharatiya Janata Party and a kind of legitimacy to Bharatiya Janata Party and Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. So one has to give, I would say, deep thought, a long thought about the relationship between liberals and left. For example, in West Bengal, in the last Lok Sabha elections, parliamentary elections, left told its electorate or constituents that to keep Trinamool Congress party out of power, if BJP gains more seats, they should go for it. And this time too, in assembly elections, the slogan was that this time Ram, next time Vam, that is left. So this time BJP, next time we will come. So the primary aim is to keep Trinamool Congress out. And it has dented the prospects of left very badly. Left has been wiped out in West Bengal. So left will have to rethink its strategy in India, especially, but globally, and especially in context of European Union and other countries, what exactly we have as a proposal. First is, and I agree with Eviane, that you have to see Indian right as part of the global right. And recently, the connections and with the rise and the spread of Hindu diaspora in European countries and the United States of America and elsewhere, Hindu right is making its voice politically very important. So, for example, they are asserting in the United States of America, they are asserting in the United Kingdom and other countries as well, in Australia and other countries. So, and we also know that Vishwa Hindu Parishad and Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh and its allied organizations like Seva Bharati and Adivasi Manwale Kalyan Kendra get funding from outside India. So we have been pleading, our friends in the United States of America and European countries have been pleading to stop hate funding. And it has to be taken up as a major thing to stop hate funding, to track, to see where funds are going and how these funds from Europe and America and elsewhere are being used to spread hate and anti-Muslim and anti-Christian hate in India. And that has to be taken up. Diplomatically, I don't know what. I don't know whether European universities and American universities can tell their counterparts that if you are using these practices, these are not good established academic practices, and it's very difficult for us to partner with you. We don't know whether it can happen or not, but they can. A discourse can always start that you want to be a world-class university, you want to be a world-class higher education system, and if you are censoring textbooks, if you are censoring scholarly books, if you are outlawing Wendy Doniger's book, if you are disinviting scholars, then it would be very difficult for us to have partnership with you. But as Eviane said, that India is a large market, and that's a huge temptation. European countries and other countries would find very difficult to resist. So I don't know whether they will come to the age of struggling liberal democracy in India or not. But these are the thoughts I have, and you can follow it.
Well, thank you, Apoorvanand. And Vidya, we are really running out of time, so if you could keep it very short.
Very quick.
Closing statements.
Okay.
Please.
Yes, I second what Apoorvanand said, especially in terms of monitoring of monetary flows to the Sangh and its affiliates. Just like the Indian government has come down hard on civil society organizations doing work amongst the poorest and the most marginalized, seeing that FCRA, the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, is really used as a weapon against them. Otherwise, during COVID times, for example, a lot more could have been done much more easily. The other thing is the whole aspect of how social media is being used. So, so there is this whole narrative which goes out of and creates even more disaffection and dissatisfaction, and this whole perception that Muslims are taking over our women, they're taking over our land, our businesses, they have all the money, and they are the terrorists. And there's a whole network of on the ground and virtual activists who take this narrative all over the place. Some of them are also abroad. So I think somehow if Facebook and Twitter can be pressurized by the international community, and all these social media sites which are amplifying hate are somehow monitored, we are not even able to keep our hate crime monitoring lists going. So I think some help with that kind of thing from people who think like us elsewhere is very good. We know that Facebook audience insights have said that Sangh ideology posts have really are really very, very popular on social media. So and their presence amongst colleges, not just among students and academics, but now there are thought influencers and new people cropping up who are influencing young minds all the time. And they are also amongst working professionals, among the bureaucrats of every state, the police force, etc., even the media. So we have really to battle on all fronts, and we are like Abhimanyu, really. So some kind of monitoring of this phenomena and who is saying what, putting hate speech down across our borders, that would be good. The other thing, which is a little delicate, and I'll end with this, is that remember when just after I spoke and when Apoorvanand spoke, he said, I didn't mention how the Sangh treats Christians. And really, it's very curious. In my place, many of the Christians come from upper castes, okay? Unlike in some other place, they are not tribal or Adivasis as much. And they are as anti-Muslim as the Sanghi here, okay? And I think this kind of talking and confronting them with their own, notions that you are as rabidly anti-Muslim as the next Sanghi whom you like to oppose. So they'll always speak anti-BJP, and it's very easy for them to seem secular. But I know, because most of my closest friends are Christians, and they speak openly with me, and I see how anti-Muslim they are. That this
Vidya,
somehow
maybe
needs to be talked to. Oh, sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry. I think the next panel is going to start soon, and I see Ritumbura very nervous.
Okay, so but that's all. That we need to talk
please.
about this. We need to talk about this. Otherwise, it gets swept under the carpet.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Very much.
Thanks a lot, Kheya, and thanks a lot, Vidya. I hear you, and I would like to tell you that at least what Professor Apoorvanand, Vidya, and even Eviane mentioned in their talks about the Facebook policies and Twitter monitoring. Actually, our foundation, which Kheya is an advisor of as well, is involved in that. And we very closely work with the policy teams of Facebook to talk to them about the issues that are happening in India with a focus on getting these pages down and reducing their reach and their voices. We have been a little bit of success in the Corona Jihad pages that were put out. So you will see a lot less Corona Jihad mentioned on the Facebook, and a lot of work went behind that. Having said that, we actually have a panel immediately after this on scientific disinformation and misinformation. The status of science in tackling disinformation and misinformation. And tomorrow we have a panel on defunding the hate, followed by a panel on populism and nationalism. And after that, we have a lot of panels which are actually hitting exactly on this narrative building, the fake news, and how we need to tackle it within our Indian and EU context. So I do invite all of you to join us if you like, and if you want to also be participatory in the discussion, just let us know and we'll be happy to accommodate you into that. Having said that, I also want to make an appeal for funds to our audience, wider audience, because one of our partners from India, Karwane Mohabbat, has started its Keto fundraiser for helping the families affected because of the second wave of COVID. So if you are looking to donate, please go to Keto, and we will also share the link in our Twitter handles, and please donate there. And thank you once again. Thank you, Kheya. Thank you, Eviane, Vidya, Apoorvanand, and Justin for being here today with us and making this a very successful interactive discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
all.
you.